He took her hand in front of everyone, not gently, not by accident. He reached across the ballroom floor past 24 witnesses and closed his fingers around Charlotte Beaumont's gloved hand, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Eleanor watched from 3 feet away. She did not move. She did not speak. The music kept playing. The candles kept burning. And every single person in that room turned to look at Eleanor Ashford waiting for tears, waiting for a scene. Instead, Eleanor smiled. She leaned slightly toward her husband. And in a voice only he could hear, she whispered 2 words, "I understand." Then she walked out. If you love stories about dignity, courage, and the kind of love that must be earned, subscribe to Royal Whisper Tales and stay with us until the very end. And leave a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We would love to know how far this story has traveled. The evening had started beautifully. Eleanor had dressed carefully that night, not to impress anyone in particular. That was never her way. She wore a cream-colored gown with a modest neckline and her mother's pearl earrings, the small ones, not the long dramatic ones her mother-in-law always suggested. Margaret, her housekeeper, had helped her arrange her hair, and then stood back to look at her, the way only Margaret ever did, with complete honesty. "You look like a woman who knows exactly what she's worth," Margaret said. Eleanor had laughed softly. "And what is that worth, Margaret?" Margaret did not hesitate. "More than this house and everyone in it put together." Eleanor had squeezed the old woman's hand and gone downstairs to meet Alexander. He was already waiting in the front hall, dressed in his dark coat and silver waistcoat. He was handsome. She had always known that. Even after 8 years of marriage, she could admit that without bitterness. Alexander Ashford was the kind of man who commanded a room simply by walking into it. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. She had loved that confidence once. It had felt like safety. She wasn't sure what it felt like anymore. "You're late," he said. "I am precisely on time," she replied. He offered his arm without looking at her directly. She took it. They walked out together. To anyone watching, they were the picture of a perfect marriage. The Hargrove estate was lit up like it was trying to compete with sunrise. Carriages lined the drive. Voices spilled out from every window. The autumn air carried the smell of wood smoke and candle wax and something sweet, apple cider maybe, or the particular perfume that always seemed to cling to crowded Virginia parlors. They were announced at the door the way they always were. Mr. and Mrs. Alexander Ashford of Ashford Estate. Heads turned. People smiled. A few men came forward to shake Alexander's hand. Women touched Eleanor's arm and told her she looked lovely. She smiled at all of them. She answered their questions about the harvest and the children and the new addition to the East Wing. She did everything she always did, and she watched her husband. She had learned to watch him the way you watch weather, not with fear, but with the particular attention of someone who has been caught in unexpected storms before. She noticed when he straightened slightly. She noticed the small shift in his expression, the way the calculating look became something else, something warmer, something she had not seen directed at her in a very long time. She followed his gaze across the room. Charlotte Beaumont stood near the far window. Eleanor knew Charlotte. Everyone in Richmond knew Charlotte. She was 29, the daughter of a prominent local politician, and she carried herself with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having been told no. She was beautiful in an obvious way, the kind of beauty that stopped conversation. She wore deep blue silk that evening, and her dark hair was pinned up with what appeared to be real sapphires. Charlotte was looking back at Alexander. And Alexander, her husband, the father of her children, the man who had spoken vows before God and witnesses 8 years ago, was smiling at Charlotte Beaumont the way he used to smile at Eleanor. Eleanor turned away. She accepted a glass of punch from a passing tray. She engaged the woman beside her, Mrs. Catherine Holloway, who always had opinions about everything in a conversation about the upcoming harvest festival. She smiled and nodded and asked the right questions at the right times. And the whole time, something cold and very quiet settled into the center of her chest. She had suspected, of course. A woman always suspects before she knows. There had been small things. Alexander returning late from Richmond without adequate explanation. Letters that disappeared too quickly. A new attention to his appearance that had nothing to do with her. She had told herself stories about all of it. Told herself she was imagining things. Told herself that a man of Alexander's character would not, could not. But here he was, across a crowded ballroom, walking toward Charlotte Beaumont, in front of every person who mattered in this county. Eleanor kept talking to Mrs. Holloway. Her voice did not waver once. The moment Alexander reached Charlotte, the music shifted slower, quieter, the kind of waltz that required partners to stand close. He stopped in front of her. He said something that made Charlotte laugh. It was a private laugh, the kind a woman only gives a man when she feels she belongs to him in some way. Then he reached out and took her hand. Not to lead her to the dance floor. Just held it. Right there. In the middle of the room, with his wife 20 feet away. The room noticed. Eleanor noticed the room noticing. Mrs. Holloway's voice trailed off mid-sentence. She had noticed too. For 3 full seconds. Eleanor felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room sliding toward her face. Waiting. Everyone was waiting. They wanted to see what Eleanor Ashford would do. Would she cry? Would she confront him? Would she throw the punch at someone? She did none of those things. She tilted her head slightly and smiled at Mrs. Holloway, as if the woman had just said something mildly interesting. "I'm sorry you were saying something about the Hargrove children." Mrs. Holloway blinked. Yes. Yes, the eldest has gone to university now." "How wonderful for them," Eleanor said warmly. And inside, she felt the cold thing in her chest grow very still. She waited 15 more minutes. Not because she was paralyzed. Not because she didn't know what to do. She waited because she was thinking. That was what people who had known Eleanor Whitmore all her life understood about her. She never moved in anger. Her father had taught her that. Decisions made in fire leave scorch marks on everything you touch, Eleanor. Wait for the cold, then decide. She watched Alexander move through the evening with Charlotte's hand, still occasionally touching his arm, his sleeve, the edge of his coat. She watched Charlotte's small, triumphant smile. She watched the way the other women in the room whispered behind their fans. And she made a decision. It was not a dramatic decision. It wasn't the decision a younger version of herself might have made, the one who would have marched across that room and said things that couldn't be unsaid. This decision was quieter, harder, more permanent. She set down her glass. She crossed the room. She walked directly to Alexander, who was mid-sentence with a small group that included Charlotte, 2 other men, and the Hargrove son, who was too young to understand what he was witnessing. Alexander looked up when she approached. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or the beginning of guilt. "Eleanor," he said. "Alexander," she replied pleasantly. She turned to acknowledge the group with perfect courtesy. "Good evening. I hope you'll forgive me for interrupting." She turned back to her husband. She kept her voice low enough that only he could hear it. "Lady Charlotte understands your ambitions better than anyone," she said, repeating the exact words he had used earlier in the evening when he'd excused himself to go speak with Charlotte. She had heard him say it to Thomas Reeves on his way across the room. She'd filed it away without reacting the way she filed away everything that hurt. Alexander went completely still. She held his gaze for one moment. Then she leaned just slightly closer and whispered very quietly, without any drama at all. "I understand." She stepped back. She nodded graciously at the group. She turned and walked toward the hall. She did not run. She did not hurry. She walked at the same unhurried pace she always used, the one her mother had taught her, the one that said, "I am leaving, because I choose to not, because I have been driven out." She retrieved her wrap from the servant at the door. She asked for her carriage, and she walked out into the cool Virginia night while the music still played behind her. The carriage ride home was 17 minutes. Eleanor counted them. She sat completely straight, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the dark road ahead. She did not cry. She had promised herself she would not cry in the carriage, because the driver was a kind young man named Thomas, who deserved not to witness someone's dignity collapsing. She thought about Alexander's face when she'd said those words. She thought about Charlotte's hand on his sleeve. She thought about the way every woman in that ballroom had looked at her, some with pity, some with a horrible, hungry curiosity, and a few the ones who had known her longest with something that looked like respect. She walked out, those women would say tomorrow, without a single word of accusation, without a single tear. And Eleanor thought, yes, I did. But what happened next, that was the part that would matter. Margaret was awake when Eleanor arrived home. Of course she was. Margaret Bell had been with Eleanor's family since Eleanor was 7 years old, and the woman had the particular instinct of someone who spent her life watching other people's faces for information they weren't willing to speak. She opened the front door before Eleanor had even reached the steps. She took one look at Eleanor's face and said nothing at all. She took Eleanor's wrap. She followed her upstairs. She helped her out of her dress and her uncomfortable shoes without being asked. She brought a cup of warm spiced tea that Eleanor didn't request but accepted with both hands. And then Margaret sat in the chair by the window and waited. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed. She held the cup. She looked at nothing in particular for a long moment. "He held her hand," Eleanor said finally, "in front of everyone." Margaret made a small sound. It wasn't surprise. "How long?" "I don't know exactly. Long enough for it to mean something." "Has it been going on long?" "I believe so, yes." Margaret was quiet. Then, "What are you going to do?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. It was the right question. Not "how do you feel?" Margaret had enough sense to know that feelings were secondary right now. Not "what did you say to him?" that was already behind her. The right question was always the next one. "I don't know yet," Eleanor said, "but I'm going to think about it very carefully before I do anything at all." "That's wise," Margaret said. "It doesn't feel wise," Eleanor admitted. "It feels like swallowing glass." "Wise things usually do." Alexander came home 2 hours later. Eleanor heard the carriage. She heard the front door. She heard his footsteps in the hall, that particular heavy, slightly irregular rhythm she had learned to identify in the dark during 8 years of marriage. She knew the sound of him, the way she knew her own breathing. She was still sitting up. She had not changed into her nightgown. She was waiting in the chair by the fireplace with the tea growing cold beside her. She heard him stop outside her door. A long pause, then a knock. "Eleanor." She did not answer immediately. She let the silence stand for a moment, not as cruelty, but as the simple truth that she was not ready to pretend this evening had been ordinary. "Come in," she said. He opened the door. He was still in his evening clothes. His cravat was slightly loosened. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been rehearsing a conversation in the carriage and had now forgotten all of it. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "Do you—" She kept her voice perfectly even. "Eleanor." "What is her full name?" she asked. He blinked. "What, Charlotte Beaumont? Is that her full name, or does she go by something else among friends?" He looked confused and guilty at the same time. "Eleanor, I don't think that's—" "I want to make sure I have the correct name," she said calmly. "For clarity." He came further into the room. He did not sit down. She had not invited him to. He stood several feet away, turning his hat in his hands, like a man who needed something to do with them. "It isn't what it appeared to be," he started. "Alexander." She said his name quietly, without heat. "Don't." "I'm asking you to hear me. I have heard you all evening," she said. "I heard you tell Thomas Reeves that Charlotte Beaumont understands your ambitions better than anyone. I heard you walk across a room full of people you've known for 20 years to stand beside a woman who is not your wife. I heard the music keep playing while everyone in that room wondered what I would do." She paused. "I have heard a great deal tonight." He was quiet. She stood up from the chair. She was a tall woman, not as tall as him, but tall enough that she never had to look up at a man the way some women did. She looked at him directly. "I am going to go to bed," she said. "And tomorrow, I am going to think about what happens next. I would appreciate it if you didn't disturb me tonight." "Eleanor." I am trying to apologize. I know you are. She held his gaze. But I'm not ready to hear an apology yet. When I am, I'll let you know. He opened his mouth. He closed it again. Good night, Alexander, she said. He left. Eleanor stood in the middle of the room for a moment. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the dark Virginia countryside, the rolling hills she had looked at for 8 years, the elm trees at the far edge of the property, the faint outline of the eastern field that would need attention before winter. Her field, her trees, her home, or the closest thing she'd had to one. She pressed one hand flat against the glass. It was cold. She thought about what her father had said the day before her wedding. Eleanor, a woman's greatest possession is not her jewels, but the way she carries herself when they are taken away. She had carried herself. She was still carrying herself. The question was what she was carrying it all toward. The next morning she went to the study, not to confront Alexander. He had already ridden out before 7, which she suspected was partly cowardice and partly a genuine need to avoid the conversation neither of them knew how to have yet. She went to the study because she needed the household accounts. She had been managing the Ashford household accounts for 6 years. Not officially. Officially, Alexander was the head of the estate, and all financial matters ran through him. But in practice, Eleanor had quietly taken over the management of the household budget, the tenant correspondence, the supply orders, and the maintenance schedule, sometime in the 3rd year of their marriage. When it became apparent that Alexander's attention was permanently consumed by his business interests in Richmond, and he had no patience for what he called domestic particulars. She had never complained about this arrangement. It was useful work, and she was good at it. She kept everything in order. She knew every tenant by name. She knew which fields were producing well and which needed to be rested. She knew the exact state of the household reserves down to the last dollar. She pulled out the ledger she kept in the 3rd drawer. And then she found something she had not expected. Behind the household ledger, tucked flat against the back of the drawer, was a letter she did not recognize. She almost closed the drawer without taking it. It was not addressed to her. The handwriting on the outside was unfamiliar, but the name on the front was not Alexander's. It was her father's name, Mr. James Whitmore. For the attention of Miss Eleanor Whitmore. Private. It was dated 8 years ago, the month before her wedding. She sat down very slowly. She turned the letter over. It had been opened. The seal was broken old and cracked and dry. Someone had read this before her. She unfolded it. It took her 4 minutes to read it. She read it twice. Then she set it flat on the desk and placed both hands on top of it and looked at the opposite wall for a very long time. The letter was from her father's business partner, a man named Harold Sloane. It documented a transaction she had never been told about. A substantial loan from her father's estate to the Ashford family made quietly without announcement 3 months before the wedding. A loan that had saved the Ashford estate from a significant debt crisis that would have been. Mr. Sloane was very precise about this publicly ruinous. The loan had been arranged by James Whitmore as a condition of the marriage agreement. Except Eleanor had never been told about any condition. She had been told she was marrying Alexander Ashford because he was a good man from a good family who had asked for her hand. She sat with that for a long time. Margaret appeared in the doorway around 9:30 with a tray. "You didn't come down for breakfast," she said. "I wasn't hungry." Margaret set the tray on the corner of the desk. She looked at Eleanor's face, then at the letter under Eleanor's hands, then back at Eleanor's face. "What is that?" she asked. "A letter from before my wedding." Eleanor kept her voice very flat. "It appears my father arranged a substantial financial assistance to the Ashford family before my marriage was finalized." Margaret's expression did not change immediately, but her hand stilled on the tray. "How substantial?" she asked. "Significant enough to have saved this estate?" Eleanor looked at her directly. "Did you know about this?" "No." Margaret said it simply without defense. "I did not know." "Did my mother?" "I couldn't say for certain." Eleanor looked back at the letter. "I married him believing he wanted to marry me," she said. "I understood the social advantages. I understood that our families were a good match, but I believed that he asked for my hand because of something specific to me, something he valued. Margaret was quiet. Now I'm wondering, Eleanor said, whether anyone in this arrangement was ever thinking about me at all. She was still in the study when Alexander came home. She heard him in the hall. She heard him ask the maid where she was. She heard his footsteps heavier in the daytime, more purposeful. He knocked twice and came in without waiting. He was reaching for some excuse to speak with her, she could tell. He had the look of a man who had prepared something on the ride back from Richmond. He stopped when he saw the letter on the desk. The color left his face. Eleanor. Sit down, Alexander. He sat. He had not sat down when invited in the last 4 years. He sat now. She picked up the letter and held it between her fingers. Would you like to tell me when you found this? I can explain. I didn't ask for an explanation yet. I asked when you found it. A long pause. Shortly after we were married. There were papers. I was going through estate documents, and I found a copy in my father's correspondence. And you said nothing. Eleanor, it was... He stopped. He started again. My father made those arrangements. I wasn't party to them. By the time I discovered it, we were already married, and I didn't see what purpose it would serve to tell me the truth about how I came to be your wife. The words sat between them like something dropped and broken. It wasn't like that, he said. I did want to marry you. The arrangement didn't change. It changes everything, she said. Not loudly, quietly. The same tone she used to correct a mistaken ledger entry. Precise. Final. It changes everything about what I thought this marriage was. Do you understand that? He was quiet for a moment. Then, yes. Good. She set the letter back on the desk. Then we are both finally understanding the same thing at the same time. That is possibly the most honest we have ever been with each other. He flinched. She looked at him. She studied his face the way she had studied it for 8 years. The strong jaw, the dark eyes, the slight tension around his mouth that appeared when he was uncomfortable. I am not going to make a scene, she said. That is not who I am. But I want you to understand that I am not the same person I was yesterday morning. And this conversation, she touched the letter lightly, combined with what I witnessed last night, means that I have some thinking to do, quite a lot of it. Eleanor, if you would let me explain about Charlotte. Not tonight, she said. I don't have the patience for it tonight. He looked at her with something that was either genuine remorse or a very good imitation of it. She could not tell. She had realized recently that she was not always able to tell with Alexander. What are you going to do? He asked. She looked at him for a long moment. I'm going to think, she said. And I would like you to leave me alone while I do it. Can you manage that? He stood. He picked up his hat from the desk. He walked to the door. And then, with his back to her, he stopped. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I am aware that I have been a very poor husband to you, in more ways than just last night. She said nothing. He left. She picked up her pen and opened the household ledger to a fresh page. And she began to write. 3 days passed. Eleanor did not avoid Alexander, but she did not seek him out. She managed the household with the same steady precision she always had. She answered correspondence. She met with the head tenant about the northern field. She wrote a long letter to her cousin in Charleston. She was not idle. Idleness would have meant thinking about pain, and she was not ready for that. On the 4th morning, she received an unexpected visitor. She was in the sitting room when the maid announced a Mrs. Frances Beaumont. Eleanor set down her needlework carefully. She straightened her posture. Show her in, she said. Frances Beaumont was Charlotte's mother, a compact, sharp-eyed woman of about 55 who had navigated Virginia society for 30 years with the efficiency of someone who treated every social interaction as a tactical exercise. Eleanor had met her perhaps a dozen times. They were polite to each other in the way that women of similar social standing were polite when they had nothing to prove to each other. Mrs. Beaumont came in, sat without being fully invited to, and wasted no time. I want to talk to you about Charlotte, she said. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. I imagined you might. She is not a malicious girl. Mrs. Beaumont's voice was careful but direct. She is young, and she is flattered by attentions from a man of Mr. Ashford's standing. But she is not she did not pursue this. I want you to understand that. You are telling me that your daughter is a passive participant in the embarrassment of my marriage, Eleanor said pleasantly. Mrs. Beaumont had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. I am telling you that I am trying to manage a situation that has gotten further than anyone intended. How far has it gotten, Mrs. Beaumont? A pause. Far enough that I thought you should hear it from someone who isn't Alexander, she said. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. How long? Since late spring. 5 months. Eleanor absorbed that. She believed, Mrs. Beaumont continued carefully, that the marriage was not what it appeared to be. Eleanor finished. Yes. And what did he tell her about our marriage? The silence that followed was long enough to answer the question without words. Eleanor stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there for a moment with her back to Mrs. Beaumont. She had known in some general way that something like this was coming. She had suspected it for months. But there is a difference between suspecting something and having it confirmed by the other woman's mother in your own sitting room on a Tuesday morning. She turned around. Thank you for coming, she said. Her voice was perfectly composed. I appreciate your honesty. It is in short supply these days. Mrs. Beaumont stood. She looked at Eleanor with an expression that was almost something like genuine regret. What will you do? Eleanor considered the question. Then she said very simply, What I have always done, Mrs. Beaumont, the right thing, even when no one else in the room is doing the same. After Mrs. Beaumont left, Eleanor went directly to Margaret's quarters. Margaret was mending something. She was always mending something. She looked up and read Eleanor's face in an instant. Sit down, she said without preamble. Eleanor sat. Charlotte's mother was just here. I saw the carriage. It's been going on since spring. Eleanor looked at her hands. He told Charlotte the marriage was not what it appeared. Margaret set down her mending. He told that woman that, apparently. That man, Margaret said, and the flatness of those 2 words held a lifetime of restraint. Eleanor almost laughed. It was a short, startled sound, not happy, but human. Yes. What are you going to do? Margaret asked. And this time, unlike all the other times someone had asked her that question in the last 4 days, Eleanor had an answer. I need to know exactly what this estate is worth, she said. And I need to know exactly what my father's loan represents in terms of that worth. And I need to know all of that before I have another conversation with my husband. Margaret looked at her steadily. You're preparing. I am always preparing, Eleanor said. The difference is that I'm preparing for a different kind of conversation than the one I've been having. What kind is that? Eleanor looked at her directly. An honest one, she said. Possibly the first one this marriage has ever had. She went back to the study that same afternoon. She pulled out every ledger, every supply record, every tenant agreement, every household account going back 6 years. She spread them across the desk, and she went through every line with the methodical precision of a woman who understood numbers, the way other people understood music instinctively, completely, without needing to think too hard about each individual note. By dinner time, she had a very clear picture. Ashford Estate was in good condition. It had been in good condition for 6 years, in fact, precisely as long as Eleanor had been managing the domestic finances. The household had consistently stayed within its budget. The tenant agreements had been kept in order. The maintenance of the eastern fields had been handled efficiently. Minor repairs had been caught early rather than allowed to become expensive emergencies. None of this had happened by accident. All of it had been Eleanor, and Alexander had never not once asked. Not once had he looked at the household ledger and said, "How is this running so smoothly?" Not once had he asked who had organized the tenant correspondence, or who had caught the drainage problem in the north field before it flooded the lower crops. He had simply lived in a well-managed house and assumed it managed itself. She sat back in her chair and looked at the stack of evidence in front of her. She was not angry. She was something more complicated than angry. She was clear, and clarity she had always found was more useful than anger. Alexander appeared in the doorway at 7 o'clock. "You missed dinner," he said. "I know." She did not look up from the ledger she was annotating. He came into the room slowly. He looked at the spread of papers across the desk. He looked at her face. Something shifted in his expression. Not guilt exactly. More like the beginning of something he didn't yet have a word for. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I am reviewing the household finances," she said. "I want to make certain I have a complete and accurate picture before I make any decisions." A pause. "What decisions? I haven't made them yet." She set down her pen and looked at him fully. "But I will." He stood in this room for a moment. He looked at the ledgers. He looked at the precise notations in her handwriting that filled every margin. "How long have you been managing all of this?" he asked. And for the first time his voice carried something genuine, not guilt, not defensiveness. Something quieter. Something that sounded possibly like the beginning of understanding. 6 years, she said. I was quiet for a long time. "I didn't know," he said finally. "No," she said. "You didn't ask." He stood there for another moment. Then he picked up one of the older ledgers from the edge of the desk and opened it, turning the pages, slowly reading the notations. His brow furrowed. "This is Eleanor. This is more complex than I thought." "Yes." She watched him. "It is." He set the ledger back down. He looked at her, and she saw finally something she had not expected to see on his face on this particular night, in this particular room, after this particular week. He looked ashamed. Not of the affair. Not yet that shame was still buried under justification. But he looked ashamed of this. Of the ledgers. Of the 6 years of work he had never seen. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "You do." He left without further argument. Eleanor turned back to her ledgers. She picked up her pen, and she kept working. Late that night, when the house was quiet, and Margaret had finally gone to bed, Eleanor sat alone in the study, with a single candle and the letter from Harold Sloane open on the desk in front of her. She had been thinking about it all day, through the ledgers, through the conversation with Alexander, through dinner. She had eaten alone at the small table by the window because the formal dining room felt wrong without a reason to be formal. She had been thinking about what her father had done. James Whitmore had been a good man. She believed that. She had always believed that. He had been educated, principled, careful, a man who built his merchant business on reputation and fair dealing. A man who had told his daughter that her greatest possession was the way she carried herself. And he had arranged a substantial financial assistance to a family in trouble and then given his daughter to that family's son without telling her what he had done. Why? She could imagine several answers. He had believed Alexander was a good man, despite the financial difficulty which was possible. He had wanted a secure future for Eleanor, which was understandable. He had perhaps not thought the financial arrangement was relevant to the marriage itself, which was, she now understood, spectacularly wrong. Or, and this was the thought she kept returning to, the one she could not quite push away. He had known that telling Eleanor would cause her to refuse, and he had not been able to bear it. She sat with that possibility for a long time. Then she folded the letter. She placed it in her own private correspondence box, not back in the drawer where she had found it, but in her own keeping. She blew out the candle. She went to bed. But she lay awake for a long time in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house around her, the particular creaks and settlings of a building she knew better than she knew the man she had married. She thought, what does a woman do when she discovers that the life she thought she built on love was built, at least in part, on arrangements she never agreed to? She thought, what does she do when she realizes that she has, despite all of this, made something real and good out of it? She thought, and what does she do when she realizes that the person who most needs to understand, that the one who has the most to lose, has spent 8 years looking straight at it without seeing it at all? She did not have answers yet. But she had questions. Clear, precise, honest questions. And in Eleanor Ashford's experience, Clear questions were always the first step toward answers that mattered. The following morning, Eleanor rose early. She dressed herself. She did not call for Margaret. She wore a plain dark dress, practical and unfussy. She went downstairs. She went into the kitchen where the cook was already at work, and she poured her own cup of tea and stood at the kitchen window and drank it while watching the first gray light come up over the eastern field. The field looked different in the morning. Quieter. Less like a possession, and more like a thing that simply existed with its own particular patience. She thought about the letter. She thought about Charlotte Beaumont's mother in her sitting room. She thought about Alexander's face when he realized she had seen through him. She thought about all the things she knew about this estate that he didn't. And then Margaret appeared wrapped in her house robe, her hair still not yet done, looking slightly alarmed to find Eleanor in the kitchen at this hour. "What are you doing up?" Margaret asked. "Thinking," Eleanor said. "About what?" Eleanor set her cup down on the windowsill. She looked out at the field for another moment. Then she turned around and looked at Margaret directly. "I need you to find out," she said, "who holds the legal documents connected to my father's original loan to this family. I need a name, an attorney, a business partner, whoever is in possession of that paperwork." Margaret stared at her. "Eleanor, I am not doing anything rash," Eleanor said quietly. "I am doing something very careful. There is a difference." She picked up her cup. "Can you help me with this?" Margaret looked at her for a long time. "Yes," she said finally. "I can." "Good." Eleanor nodded. "Then let's begin." She set her cup down. She walked out of the kitchen. And behind her, Margaret stood very still for a moment, looking at the empty doorway with an expression that was equal parts worry and something that looked very much like pride. Eleanor Ashford had made a decision. And the woman who made decisions quietly and carefully and without warning was, in Margaret Bell's experience, the most dangerous kind of woman in the world. She found the attorney on a Thursday. His name was Robert Kane. He had handled her father's business affairs for nearly 20 years, and he still operated out of the same modest office on Broad Street in Richmond that Eleanor remembered visiting as a girl, a narrow room with too many books and not enough light, always smelling of ink and old paper. She had sent a letter ahead. He was expecting her. She did not tell Alexander she was going to Richmond. She told Margaret and Margaret alone, and Margaret had looked at her with that particular expression, the one that said, "I support this completely, and I will not say another word about it," and had the carriage ready by 8 in the morning. The drive to Richmond was 40 minutes. Eleanor spent it going over her questions in her mind, organizing them the way she organized a household ledger, by priority, by weight, by what she needed to know first before anything else could make sense. Robert Kane stood when she came in. He was a small man, older now than she remembered, with neat white hair and the careful eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime reading other people's intentions from across a desk. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "it is good to see you, though I confess your letter was somewhat unexpected." "I imagine it was," she said, and sat down. She placed the letter from Harold Sloane on the desk between them. Kane looked at it. He looked at her. He did not pick it up. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "In my husband's study," she said, "behind a household ledger. I believe it had been there for some time." Howe was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed a short, controlled sound and sat back in his chair. "Your father," he said carefully, "was a man who loved you very much." "I know that," Eleanor said. "I also know that love does not require secrecy. So I need you to tell me, Mr. Kane, exactly what the arrangement was. All of it. Not the version that protects anyone's feelings, the accurate version." Kane looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a folder that was thick with papers. "The loan," he said, "was $15,000. Eleanor did not move. On the inside, something lurched hard and sudden. On the outside, she folded her hands in her lap and kept her face completely still. "Structured as a private agreement between your father and the late Mr. Thomas Ashford," Kane continued. "It was made 3 months before your engagement was formally announced. The repayment terms were flexible, deliberately so." He paused. "It has not been repaid." "Any of it?" she asked. "No." Another long pause. The Ashford estate was in genuine difficulty at that time, Kane said carefully. The elder Mr. Ashford had made several poor investments in the 2 years prior. The debt was significant. Without your father's intervention, the estate would likely have faced. He stopped. It would have been serious. And in exchange for this intervention, Eleanor said, my father arranged my marriage to Alexander. Your father believed Alexander was a good man, Kane said quickly, almost defensively. He believed the marriage was genuinely suitable. He wasn't Mrs. Ashford, he wasn't selling you. I want you to understand that. He was trying to secure your future and solve a problem at the same time. Those two things, Eleanor said, are not as compatible as he believed. Kane was quiet. What I need to know, she continued, is this. Is there any documentation that connects my father's financial assistance to this estate? Any documentation that would in legal terms represent a claim? Kane looked at her carefully. What kind of claim? Any kind, she said. I want to understand what the legal reality of this situation is, not what is publicly known, not what is socially expected, the legal reality. He studied her for a long moment. Then he said slowly, there is documentation. Yes. It was drawn up as a formal loan agreement. The terms were never enforced. Your father had no intention of enforcing them. But the documentation exists. And who holds it? I do, he said. She looked at him steadily. Then I would like copies. He blinked. Mrs. Ashford, I am not going to do anything destructive with them, she said. I am not going to use them as a weapon. I am going to use them as information. There is a difference. A long pause. Then Robert Kane opened his folder and began organizing the papers. Your father, he said quietly without looking up, used to say that you were the sharpest mind in the family. My father, Eleanor said, was usually right about most things. She accepted the copies. She thanked him. She walked back out to the carriage. She held the papers in her lap the entire drive home and did not open them. She already knew what they said. She just needed to own them. Alexander was home when she arrived back at Ashford. She could tell before she even went inside his horse was in the yard, and there were 2 other horses she did not recognize. He had guests. Of course he had guests. Alexander always had guests when she needed the house to herself. She went in through the side entrance. She gave her coat to the maid. She went upstairs and placed the copies from Kane in her private correspondence box, locked it, and put the key in the pocket of her dress. Then she went downstairs and walked calmly into the front sitting room. 3 men were with Alexander, business associates from Richmond, men she knew by name and by reputation. They stood when she entered. She smiled at all of them. She asked whether anyone needed refreshment. She spent 8 minutes in that room being the pleasant, gracious wife of Alexander Ashford. And the whole time the key to her correspondence box sat in her dress pocket like a small hard fact. When she excused herself, Alexander followed her into the hall. Where were you this morning? He asked. Richmond, she said. A pause. Why? I had a matter to attend to. He looked at her. His jaw tightened slightly, the expression she had learned to recognize as the one he wore when he wanted to press a point, but knew he had no legitimate standing to press it. Eleanor, he said, we need to talk, properly, not like the last few days. I know, she said. We do. Then when? She considered him. When I am ready, I will tell you. She started toward the stairs. That's not... He stopped. Then, Eleanor, I need you to tell me what you're thinking. She turned around and looked at him fully. I'm thinking, she said, that you have spent 8 years in a marriage that you didn't fully understand, making decisions that you haven't fully examined, and living in a household that functioned well because of work. You never looked at closely enough to see. She kept her voice even. And I'm thinking that before we have any conversation about what happens next, you need to sit with that for a little while. He opened his mouth. She turned back to the stairs. Your guests are waiting, she said. That evening she wrote to her cousin. Her cousin Catherine lived in Charleston, married to a lawyer, busy with 4 children, but always available for the kind of correspondence that other women would have found alarming. Catherine was the only person in Eleanor's life besides Margaret, who could be told an honest version of things. I need your advice. Eleanor wrote on a practical matter. I will not bore you with the emotional details because you will have already understood them from reading this far. What I need to know is this. What are the realistic options available to a woman in my position? She did not write a woman whose husband is conducting an affair. She did not need to. Catherine would understand. She wrote 4 pages. She sealed the letter. She gave it to Thomas the driver to take to the post first thing in the morning. Then she sat at her desk and opened the household ledger again. If she was going to understand her options, she needed to understand her position. Completely. Not just the financial picture she already had, but the social one. Who in this county would stand with her if things became difficult? Who owed her family goodwill? Who respected her independently of Alexander? She thought it through methodically. The tenants. 6 families on Ashford land who paid regular rents who had dealt with Eleanor directly for years because Alexander had no patience for the particulars of tenant management. They knew her. They trusted her. The local women's charitable organization, which she had chaired for the past 4 years. 12 members, most of them from prominent families. All of them aware that the organization functioned because of Eleanor's organizational abilities. 3 families in Richmond, whose children had benefited from the informal educational program Eleanor had established quietly without fanfare 3 years ago, when she noticed that the local school was producing students who could recite dates but couldn't read a contract. All of this existed. All of it was real. None of it was in Alexander's name. She wrote it all down. She was not building a weapon. She was taking an inventory. There was a difference. The next morning brought something she had not expected. Charlotte Beaumont arrived at Ashford Estate. Not her mother this time. Charlotte herself alone, without a companion, in a simple carriage that suggested she had not wanted to be seen. She asked for Mrs. Ashford. The maid came to find Eleanor in the garden where Eleanor had gone for her morning walk. Eleanor stood very still for a moment when the maid delivered the message. Then she said, "Show her to the small sitting room. I'll be there directly." She went inside. She did not rush. She smoothed her hair and straightened her collar and walked into the small sitting room with the same composure she brought to every room she entered. Charlotte was standing near the window. She turned when Eleanor came in. Eleanor had not expected whatever she was looking at. She had expected confidence. She had expected the easy, self-assured manner of a woman who believed she held an advantage. She had prepared herself to face a version of Charlotte Beaumont that required a certain kind of handling. What she was looking at was a 29-year-old woman who looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. "Mrs. Ashford," Charlotte said. "Miss Beaumont." Eleanor sat down. She gestured toward the opposite chair. Charlotte sat. She was quiet for a moment. She had clearly prepared something to say, and she had clearly lost confidence in it on the way over. "I don't know why I came," she said finally. "I suspect," Eleanor said, "that you came because you needed to say something to me directly, without your mother and without my husband and without anyone managing the conversation on your behalf." Charlotte looked at her. "Yes," she said. "That's it exactly." A short pause. "I want you to know," Charlotte said carefully, "that he told me the marriage was finished, in every meaningful sense. He told me that you had both understood for some time that it was—" She stopped. "He told me there was nothing left between you." Eleanor absorbed that. "And did you believe him?" she asked. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to," she said honestly. "It was easier to believe him." "Yes," Eleanor said. "I imagine it was. I am not trying to excuse it," Charlotte said. "I know I should have. I should have asked more questions. I should have—" She stopped again. "I don't know what I should have done differently, but I know what I did was wrong." Eleanor looked at her for a long time. She thought about several things. She thought about anger, the real kind, the kind that had every right to exist in this room. She thought about what it would feel like to say the sharp, precise, devastating thing that this woman had coming to her. She thought about her father's voice. A woman's greatest possession is not her jewels, but the way she carries herself when they are taken away. "Miss Beaumont." Eleanor said. I am not going to tell you that what you did was acceptable. It wasn't, and I suspect you know that. But I am also not going to spend the energy this conversation would cost me on humiliating you. That is not how I choose to spend my time. Charlotte blinked. She had clearly expected something harder than this. What I will tell you, Eleanor continued, is that whatever Alexander told you about this marriage, about what was left or not left between us, he told you to make himself comfortable, not because it was true. A pause. He lied to you, Eleanor said. Not about everything, perhaps, but about the things that mattered most. Charlotte was very quiet. I think, she said slowly, I knew that. Yes, Eleanor said. I believe you did. Charlotte stood. She was steadier now, the way people sometimes become steadier after hearing the truth said plainly without cruelty. I'm sorry, she said. I know you are, Eleanor said. That's why I let you say it. Charlotte left. Eleanor sat alone in the small sitting room for a few minutes. Then she went to find Margaret. Charlotte Beaumont was just here, she said. Margaret looked up from the table where she was sorting through the week's household correspondence. Charlotte herself. Yes. And she came to apologize. Eleanor sat down across from her. She also confirmed that Alexander told her the marriage was effectively over. Margaret's expression went very still. He said that. Apparently. To a woman he was... Margaret stopped. That man. Yes. Eleanor looked at the table. It changes things. How so? Because it means he wasn't just being weak, Eleanor said. He was being deliberate. He made a decision, a real one, not just a moment of poor judgment, to tell another woman that his wife was already gone. She paused. That is not the same as a mistake. That is a choice. Margaret was quiet for a moment. What will you do? I'm going to talk to him, Eleanor said. Tonight. No more waiting. She found Alexander in the study after dinner. He was at the desk, going through correspondence, doing the work he always did in the evenings, the Richmond business that consumed so much of his attention. He looked up when she came in. Eleanor. He set down his papers immediately. Sit down. I'll stand. She came to the center of the room. I need you to tell me the truth about something, and I need you to tell me clearly. Not an explanation, the truth. He was very still. Did you tell Charlotte Beaumont that this marriage was over? She asked. A long pause. A very long pause. Eleanor. Yes or no, Alexander? The silence was its own answer, but she waited. I told her, he said finally, that the marriage had been difficult, for a long time, that we had grown apart. Did you tell her it was effectively finished? He looked at the desk. I may have implied. Did you tell her? He looked up at her. Yes, he said. I did. The room was very quiet. So you told another woman, Eleanor said, that your wife was already gone, while I was sitting in your house, managing your household, raising your children, writing your tenant correspondence, keeping the financial records that keep this entire estate from falling apart. She kept her voice level. You told her all of that was nothing. He said nothing. You didn't end this marriage, Alexander, she said. You just pretended you had, because it was easier than being honest. Eleanor, I don't. She held up one hand. I don't want another explanation. I have enough explanations. I want to tell you something instead. He waited. I found Mr. Kane this week, she said. I reviewed the documentation related to my father's loan to your family. He went completely white. You knew, she said. You knew before I did. You found it in your father's papers, and you chose not to tell me. For 8 years. Eleanor, I was trying to protect. You were trying to protect yourself from a conversation that made you uncomfortable. Please do not dress it up as protection of me. She held his gaze. I know you, Alexander. I have known you for 8 years. When you avoid something difficult, it is not for other people's benefit. He was silent. Here is what I want you to understand, she said. I am not leaving this house tomorrow. I am not making a scene. I am not going to your friends or your business associates with any of this. That is not who I am. But I am done pretending that everything is fine. I am done managing this household in silence while you make decisions that affect both of us without telling me the truth. I am done being the woman you assume will always be there. He stood up from the desk. What does that mean? It means, she said, that I am going to start making decisions that are good for me, for the first time in 8 years. And some of those decisions may not be convenient for you. Eleanor. I am not asking your permission, she said. I am telling you as a courtesy, because unlike you, I believe honesty costs less in the end than silence. She turned to go. Eleanor. His voice was different now, less guarded, something in it that she hadn't heard in a long time. I am sorry, not just for Charlotte, for all of it, for the years of not seeing. I am sorry. She stopped at the door. She stood there for a moment with her back to him. I know you are, she said quietly. But I told you once before, I'm not ready to hear an apology yet. She turned just enough to look at him over her shoulder. When I am Alexander, I will let you know. She walked out. Behind her, she heard him sit back down heavily in his chair. She kept walking. She went upstairs. She sat at her writing desk. She did not open any ledgers. She did not write any letters. She sat very still for a long time. She had said it. Everything she had been organizing in her mind for the past week, she had said it, not in a flood of emotion, not in a scene that would cost her dignity, but clearly and honestly, and without anything she would need to regret in the morning. She had told him the truth, and now she had to live inside what came next. Margaret came up around 9. I heard you two, she said. Not the words, just the shape of it. He admitted it, Eleanor said. The things he told Charlotte, and the loan. He knew about both. Margaret sat down in the chair. How do you feel? Tired, Eleanor said. I feel tired. She paused. But also clearer. I feel clearer than I have in a very long time. What happens next? Margaret asked. I'm going to write to Catherine again, Eleanor said. I need her to find out something for me. What? Eleanor turned to look at her. Whether there is a property in Richmond that has recently become available. Something modest. Something that could be maintained independently. She held Margaret's gaze. I am not planning to leave tomorrow. I am not acting in anger. But I want to know what my options are, concretely. Not just as ideas. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then, is there a property in particular you have in mind? The Whitmore house, Eleanor said. The one my father kept in Richmond. After he passed, it went to his estate. I don't know who manages it now. I want to find out. Margaret looked at her carefully. You want to go back to your father's house? I want to know if I can, Eleanor said. There is a difference. There is. Margaret agreed. A short silence. I'll find out, Margaret said. Thank you, Eleanor said. She turned back to her writing desk. She picked up her pen, and she wrote not to Catherine, not yet, but to herself. 3 pages of clear, organized thinking. What she knew, what she needed to know, what her next steps were in what order. When she was finished, she read it back once. Then she folded it and placed it in the correspondence box beside the copies from Kane. She locked the box. She went to bed, and for the first time since the night of the ball, she slept without waking. Not because things were better, but because she had stopped waiting for someone else to tell her what to do. 2 days later, a letter arrived from Richmond. Not from Catherine. From someone she had not heard from in 3 years. A Mrs. Dorothea Hale, the wife of a prominent Richmond attorney, and a woman Eleanor had served alongside on the charitable organization's board, before Mrs. Hale's husband's health had required her to step back from social engagements. Eleanor opened the letter at the breakfast table. Alexander had already gone out. She read it once. Then she set it down carefully, picked up her tea, and read it again. Mrs. Hale wrote that she had heard through the particular channels by which Virginia society always managed to hear things that the Ashford household was experiencing some difficulty. She wrote that she hoped Eleanor was well. She wrote that she had always admired Eleanor's management of the charitable organization, and that the women's group had not run half so efficiently since she had stepped back from her more active role. And then, at the bottom of the letter, almost as a postscript, "If you are ever in need of a quiet place to think, or a conversation that goes no further than my sitting room, you know where I am." Eleanor sat with that for a long time. It was not charity. It was not pity. It was the particular language that women of a certain kind used with each other when they wanted to say, "I see what is happening, and I am on your side, and I will not speak of it unless you ask me to." She wrote back the same day. A brief, warm reply. Yes, she would like to call. Next Thursday, if that was convenient. She sealed the letter and gave it to Thomas. She went back to her desk, and she thought about the fact that in the week since the ball, while Alexander had been talking to business associates and writing to Richmond on his own affairs, while he had been managing his world the way men of his position always managed it, with the assumption that the larger world would stay ordered around him, Eleanor had found an attorney, secured copies of documentation that no one expected her to have spoken with her husband's mistress directly, confronted Alexander himself about 2 separate betrayals, located a potential property, identified 3 lines of social support. She had not previously formalized, and arranged a meeting with a woman who had influence and goodwill and the particular discretion that made her valuable. All of it quietly. All of it without announcement. All of it in 1 week. She thought, Alexander believes he is the one with power in this marriage. He always has. He has never thought to question it. She picked up her pen. She thought I is about to start questioning it. And she began to write. The Thursday meeting with Dorothea Hale changed everything. Not in a dramatic way. Not with a revelation that knocked Eleanor sideways, or a piece of information that reordered the entire world. It changed things the way a door quietly opened, in a room you had been sitting in for years. Suddenly there was light coming from a direction you hadn't thought to look. Dorothea Hale's house in Richmond was everything Ashford Estate was not. Smaller, warmer, filled with the particular comfortable disorder of a home that was actually lived in rather than maintained for appearances. Books left open. A sewing basket with thread trailing out of it. The smell of real coffee, not the weak version served at formal calls. Dorothea herself was 60 sharp-eyed and did not waste time. "Sit down and have coffee," she said when Eleanor arrived. "And then tell me what is actually happening. Not the version you'd tell at a committee meeting, the real one." Eleanor sat. She accepted the coffee. She looked at Dorothea for a moment. Then she told her the real version, all of it. The ball. The hand-holding. Charlotte's visit. The letter from Harold Sloane. Robert Kane and the $15,000. The confrontation in the study. Alexander's admission. The question of the Whitmore property in Richmond. She told it the way she always organized things, in order without drama, precisely. It took about 20 minutes. Dorothea listened without interrupting once. When Eleanor finished, Dorothea set down her cup. "The Whitmore property," she said. "Your father's Richmond house." "Yes. I know it," Dorothea said. "I know the street. It's been managed by a rental agent since your father passed. The current tenant's lease ends in January." Eleanor went very still. "How do you know that?" she asked. "Because my husband managed the estate legal matters for your father for the last 2 years of his life," Dorothea said. "Before his health made that impossible, I paid attention." She held Eleanor's gaze. "The property is yours, Eleanor. It was left specifically to you in your father's will, not to the Ashford estate, not jointly with your husband, specifically to you." The room was very quiet. "I didn't know that," Eleanor said. "I imagine your husband did," Dorothea said without particular emphasis. Eleanor thought about Robert Kane. She thought about the neat folder of papers. She thought about what he had and hadn't told her. "I need to speak with Mr. Kane again," she said. "I believe you do," Dorothea agreed. "And Eleanor." She leaned slightly forward. "When you do ask him about the income the property has been generating, for 6 years, ask him where that income has been going." She went to see Kane that same afternoon. She did not send a letter ahead this time. She walked into his office on Broad Street, and she sat down across from him, and she looked at him with the particular expression that Margaret always said made people feel they had been caught doing something they knew they shouldn't. "The Whitmore house," she said. "Tell me about the will." Kane set down his pen. He looked at her carefully. "How did you—" "That doesn't matter. Tell me." A long pause. Then he opened a different drawer than before, the one on the left side, the one she hadn't noticed the first time. "Your father was very specific," he said, pulling out a folder. "The Richmond property was left directly to you, in your name, not subject to your husband's management or disposition. Your father was—" He stopped. "He was careful," Eleanor said. "I was very careful," Kane said quietly. "He wanted to make sure that whatever happened in the marriage, you had something that was yours alone." So he had known. Her father had known when he arranged the marriage, when he made the loan, when he walked her to the church. He had known it was not as simple as he had presented it to her. And he had quietly, without telling her, built a door she could walk through if she ever needed to. She felt two things simultaneously. The sharp ache of a man who loved her but couldn't be fully honest with her. And something else, something warmer and harder to name. The particular feeling of being protected by someone who was gone. "The rental income," she said. "Where has it gone for the past 6 years?" Kane looked at the folder. He was quiet for a moment too long. "Mr. Kane, it was deposited," he said carefully, "into the Ashford estate accounts, with the understanding that it would be tracked separately and made available to you on request." "On whose instruction?" Another pause. "Your husband's," he said. Eleanor did not move. She kept her face completely still. Inside, something cold and very solid locked into place. "He has been collecting the rental income from my property," she said, "for 6 years. "Eleanor, has he ever told me about it?" Kane stopped. "No. To my knowledge, he has not." "And you allowed this?" Kane had the grace to look genuinely ashamed. "Your father trusted Alexander. I trusted your father's judgment. And then the years passed and—" He stopped. "I should have told you directly. I know that. I should have told you when your father died and the accounts transferred. I failed you in that, and I am sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. "I want a full accounting," she said. "Every deposit, every year, the full amount." "Yes," he said. "Of course. And I want the property transferred back to active management under my name immediately. Whatever steps that requires, begin them this week. I'll start the paperwork today." She stood. She picked up her bag. "Mr. Kane," she said, "I want you to understand something. I am not doing this out of anger. I am doing it because I need to understand exactly what is mine before I have any further conversations with my husband. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes," he said. "I do." "Good." She nodded once. "Then I'll expect the accounting by the end of the week." She walked out. She did not go home directly. She walked for a while along Broad Street, past the market, through the quieter residential blocks where she had walked with her father as a girl. She needed the air. She needed the movement. She needed the particular clarity that came from putting one foot in front of another when your mind was working through something too large to sit still with. Alexander had been collecting income from her property for 6 years. 6 years. It was not a large amount in the context of what Ashford estate generated. That was almost certainly why she had never noticed it had disappeared into the larger accounts, insignificant enough to overlook unless you were looking specifically for it. But it was there. Consistent, quiet, unauthorized in any meaningful sense. He had never told her. She thought about what that meant. Not in legal terms, she was not at that point yet, but in personal terms, in the terms of what it said about the man she had been married to for 8 years. He had known about her father's loan. He had known about her property. He had managed both pieces of information for years quietly in the way you manage things you don't want examined too closely. And in all of that time, he had presented himself to the world, to her, perhaps to himself, as a man who simply hadn't noticed the ways his wife held his household together. He hadn't failed to notice. He had chosen not to look. She stopped walking. She stood on the street for a moment. She thought about Charlotte Beaumont. She thought about a 29-year-old woman who had believed what she'd been told because it was easier. She thought about Alexander sitting across from Charlotte's parlor in a carriage wherever these things happened, and telling her that Eleanor was already gone. He had been so certain she would stay. So certain she would always be there. So certain that the woman managing his household in silence would go on managing it forever, regardless of what he did. He had mistaken her patience for permanence, and that Eleanor thought was the most significant error he had ever made. She was home by 4. Alexander was in the front hall when she came in, clearly waiting, though he was holding a letter and pretending to read it. He looked at her face. "Where were you?" he asked. "Richmond," she said again. Eleanor, you've been going to Richmond almost every day this week." "Yes," she said pleasantly. "I have." "I'd like to know what you're doing there." She stopped. She turned to look at him fully, and this time she did not soften it. "I've been speaking with Robert Kane," she said, "about my father's will, about the Whitmore property in Richmond, about the rental income that has been deposited into Ashford estate accounts for the past 6 years without my knowledge." She held his gaze. "Would you like to discuss any of those things now, or would you prefer to think about what you want to say first?" The letter in his hand stopped pretending to be interesting. "Eleanor, you knew about the property," she said. "You knew my father left it directly to me. You've been collecting the income, and you said nothing." She kept her voice even. "I want you to understand that I know all of this now, clearly, with documentation." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face, not guilt exactly, but the particular expression of a man who had been certain a door was closed and has just discovered it was open the whole time. "The income was modest," he said. "I intended to—" "Alexander," she said his name quietly. "Don't tell me what you intended. Tell me why you didn't tell me." A very long pause. "Because," he said finally, "I was afraid of what you'd do with it." She had not expected that answer. She had expected justification, deflection, the elaborate architecture of a man who was good at explaining himself. She had not expected the truth. "Afraid," she said. "You would have had independence," he said. "Your own income, your own property. You would have had choices I couldn't control." He looked at the floor, then back at her. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds honest," she said, for the first time. He looked at her. "Eleanor, You were afraid I would leave," she said. "So you made sure I couldn't easily do it. And then you went ahead and gave me every reason to anyway." He had no answer for that. She walked past him and went upstairs. Margaret found her in her room an hour later. Eleanor was sitting in the chair by the window. She wasn't reading. She wasn't writing. She was just sitting with her hands in her lap, looking at something in the middle distance that wasn't in the room. "You found out something today," Margaret said. It wasn't a question. "Several things." Eleanor looked at her. "He's been collecting income from my father's Richmond property for 6 years, without telling me." She paused. "He knew. About the will, about the income. He knew, and he didn't tell me because he was afraid I'd have something of my own." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said very simply, "Oh, Eleanor." It was 2 words. But the weight in them was everything, all the years of watching all the things Margaret had seen without being asked to comment on all the quiet observations of a woman who had known Eleanor since she was 7 years old. Eleanor's composure cracked. Just slightly. A brief tightening around her eyes, a single quick breath. Then it was steady again. "I'm not going to fall apart," she said. "I know," Margaret said. "But I need to decide what I'm actually going to do. Not what I'm going to prepare for, or consider, or make contingency plans about. What I'm actually going to do." Margaret sat down. "What are your choices?" "I could stay," Eleanor said. "I could have the conversation I need to have with Alexander, establish new terms, and try to build something more honest from what's left. That is a real option. It would require things from him that I'm not certain he's capable of. And the other option, I could go to the Whitmore house when the tenant's lease expires in January. She said it plainly. I could establish myself in Richmond with my own property and my own income and stop managing a marriage that has been built on secrets from the beginning. Margaret was quiet for a long time. Which one do you want to do? She asked. I don't know yet, Eleanor said honestly. I want to know whether he is capable of change before I decide. Real change, not apology, not regret. Actual change. She looked at Margaret. And I don't know how to determine that without giving it time, which is the part I find most difficult. Because giving it time means staying. Staying in something that has hurt me, Eleanor said. Yes, Margaret nodded slowly. Then maybe that's the real question, she said. Not what you're going to do, but how much time you're willing to give him to show you who he actually is. Eleanor looked at her. That, she said quietly, is exactly the right question. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, Alexander did something she had not expected. He asked Margaret where the household ledgers were kept. Margaret, who told Eleanor everything, came to find her in the garden with an expression that mixed surprise with careful neutrality. He's in the study, Margaret said. He asked me where you kept the household accounts. The full set, not just the estate records he normally sees. Eleanor looked at her. And I showed him, Margaret said. I thought you should know. Eleanor set down what she was doing and went inside. She stopped in the doorway of the study. Alexander was at the desk. He had opened the household ledgers, all 6 years of them stacked on the left side, and he was going through them page by page, slowly, reading every notation. He didn't notice her immediately. She stood in the doorway and watched him turn a page, trace a line of figures with his finger, go back to an earlier entry to compare something. Then he looked up and saw her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. I want to understand, he said, what you've actually been doing, all of it. She came into the room slowly. She sat down in the chair across from him, not her usual chair, but the one closer to the desk, the one she would sit in if they were working together. What do you want to know? She said. How did you manage the drainage issue in the North Field 2 years ago? I never knew there was a drainage issue. I caught it in April, she said. When I reviewed the tenant's spring report, I spoke with Thomas Hadley. He's the one who handles the northern section, and we brought in a drainage team before the summer rains. What did it cost? Less than it would have cost if we'd waited until it flooded, she said. About $40, versus what would have been several hundred in crop loss. He looked at the ledger. He found the entry. He looked at the number for a long time. You've been doing this for 6 years, he said. Not a question. Yes. Everything, the tenants, the repairs, the supply contracts, the household budget. All of it. He closed the ledger. He put both hands flat on the cover. He looked at the desk for a moment. I didn't know, he said. You didn't ask. No. He looked up at her. I didn't. And I'm not going to tell you I was too busy, because that's the excuse I've been using for 8 years, and it's not good enough. He paused. I didn't ask because I assumed. I assumed everything was being handled because everything was always being handled, and I never stopped to ask who was handling it or what it cost them. She looked at him carefully. This was different. Not an apology offered in the hope of being forgiven. Not the defensive explanations she'd been getting all week. He was just looking at the ledgers, looking at 6 years of her work, and trying to understand what he was seeing. What do you want, Alexander? She said. Not as an explanation. What do you actually want? He was quiet for a moment. I want you to stay, he said. I know I don't have the right to want that. I know I have given you every possible reason to go, but I want you to stay. He met her eyes. And I know that saying that is not enough. I know that what I want doesn't have much bearing on what you decide. But you asked me honestly, and that is the honest answer. She studied his face. What are you willing to do? She said. Not promise. Do. I don't know yet, he said. And the fact that he didn't immediately produce a list of commitments was oddly more credible than if he had. I'm still trying to understand what I've already failed to do. It seems... He stopped. It seems dishonest to make promises about the future before I've fully understood the past. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I want you to listen without responding until I've finished." "All right," he said. "I have spent 8 years being faithful to this marriage," she said. "Not because I had no choices, not because I was afraid to leave, because I believed in what I thought it was. I believed we were building something honest together, even if we weren't as close as I'd hoped. I believed you were a man of integrity, even when you disappointed me in smaller ways. That belief was the foundation of everything I did in this house, every ledger I kept, every problem I solved, every time I smiled at a dinner table when I would rather have said something difficult." She held his gaze. "What I've learned this week is that the foundation was built on things I was never told. That does not erase 8 years, but it changes them. It changes what they mean." I was very still. "I am not going to make a decision today," she continued. "I am not going to leave tomorrow morning, and I am not going to pretend everything is fine. I am going to continue to manage this household because the people who depend on it, the tenants, the staff, the children, did not create this situation and should not suffer for it. But I am managing it for them. Not for you. Not anymore." She moved toward the door. "The Whitmore property in Richmond becomes available in January," she said. "I am going to spend the time between now and then deciding what I want. You are going to spend the same time showing me, not telling me, not promising me who you are when you are being honest with yourself." She stopped at the door. "One more thing," she said. "Charlotte Beaumont." He went stiff. "I've spoken with her," Eleanor said. "She knows what she was to you. She is not a monster. She is a young woman who believed what a man in a position of power told her. The responsibility for that is yours, not hers." She looked at him steadily. "But if I ever discover that contact has continued past this week in any form, I will walk out of this house, and I will not come back. Not to punish you, because it will tell me clearly that no amount of time will change the answer." He said nothing. "Do you understand?" she said. "Yes," he said. "I understand." She walked out. She went directly to Margaret's quarters. She did not knock. She came in and sat down on the edge of the chair. "I gave him a condition," she said. Margaret looked at her. "What kind?" "The only one that matters." She paused. "And I told him I'm going to watch what he does, not what he says." Margaret was quiet. Then, "How did he take it?" "He didn't argue," Eleanor said. "He didn't try to negotiate. He just said he understood." She looked at her hands. "Which is either genuine or the most sophisticated performance I've ever seen. I don't know which yet." "Time will tell," Margaret said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "That's the part I have to be patient about." A short silence. "Margaret," Eleanor said, "do you think people can actually change, not adjust, not manage their behavior better for a period, actually change the way they see things, the things they value?" Margaret thought about it seriously. Some people, she said. "Not many, but some." "What makes the difference?" "Whether they're changing because they want something back," Margaret said, "or because they're ashamed of who they've been." She paused. "The first kind don't usually last. The second kind sometimes do." Eleanor considered that. "He looked ashamed today," she said, "when he was reading the ledgers. Not of the affair. Of not knowing. Of not asking." She looked at Margaret. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it yet," Margaret said. "That's the point of waiting." Eleanor nodded slowly. A week later. Something happened that she hadn't planned for. She was at the charitable organization's monthly meeting. 12 women. A topic and the kind of conversation that got more done in 2 hours than most men's business meetings managed in a day. She was chairing as usual. The topic was the proposed expansion of the educational program she had started 3 years ago. More families, more teachers. A question about funding. The meeting was nearly finished when one of the newer members, a Mrs. Priscilla Grant, wife of a newly arrived banking associate from Philadelphia, said something. "I want to say," Mrs. Grant announced with the slightly over-careful enunciation of someone who had rehearsed this, "that I think we should formally acknowledge Mrs. Ashford's contribution to this program. Not just her work on the committee. The program itself. It exists because of her. A brief silence. Then the other women began to agree, not in a rush of flattery, but in the specific particular way that meant they had been thinking it for a while and were glad someone had said it. She organized the teachers, said one. She secured the first donations, said another. She managed the entire first year alone, when we didn't have the committee structure yet, said Dorothea Hale from the back of the room. Eleanor looked around the room. She had not expected this. She had come prepared with agenda items and budget figures and a proposal for the expansion. She had not come prepared to be seen. I'm very grateful, she said. But this program belongs to all of us. It belongs to you, Dorothea said simply. You should know that. Whatever else is happening in your life right now, you should know that. The room was quiet for a moment, and Eleanor, who had held herself completely together through 2 weeks of the most significant upheaval of her adult life, who had managed every conversation without flinching, who had gone through ledgers and legal documents and confrontations and admissions without shedding a single visible tear, felt something loosen in her chest. Not grief. Something else. Something more like the particular relief of being recognized by people who owed her nothing. Thank you, she said. And this time, she meant it in a way she hadn't meant many things recently. She drove home that evening in a different state than she had been in for 2 weeks. Not resolved, nothing was resolved. But steadier. More like herself. She thought about what Dorothea had said. Whatever else is happening in your life right now, you should know that. She thought, I do know it. I have always known it. The problem was that I was the only one who did. She thought maybe that is about to change. She thought, and maybe whether it changes or not, it will be enough. When she got home, there was something on her writing desk. An envelope. Her name on the outside in Alexander's handwriting. No other marking. She stared at it for a moment. She had not told him she would be home at this hour. He could not have known exactly when she'd return, which meant he had left it there to be found rather than handed to her directly. She picked it up. Inside was a single piece of paper. On it, in Alexander's careful, precise handwriting, the hand of a man who had received a thorough education and used it sparingly, was a list. Not an apology. Not a promise. A list. Tenant accounts. Northern drainage. Supply contracts. Educational program. Household budget. Staff management. Correspondence maintenance. East Wing repairs. 1913. Whitmore property income. Every significant thing she had managed. Every piece of work she had done in 6 years that he had not known about, or had ignored, or had quietly benefited from without acknowledgement. Every single one. Listed. In his handwriting. At the bottom one line. I should have asked. That was all. Eleanor stood holding the paper for a long time. She did not know what it meant for the future. She did not know whether it was the beginning of something real or the most articulate version of a man trying to get something back. She didn't know, and she had decided she was not going to let herself pretend she knew. But she knew what it had cost him to write it. She knew the particular pride of Alexander Ashford, the way he held himself, the way he assumed competence without examining it. She knew how much that list had required of him. She folded the paper. She put it in the correspondence box beside the copies from Kane and the letter from Harold Sloane. She locked the box. She sat down at her desk. And for the first time in 2 weeks, she did not open a ledger. She did not write a letter. She did not organize or plan or prepare. She sat quietly with her hands in her lap, and she let herself feel the full weight of everything she was carrying. It was heavy. It was also, she noticed, entirely hers, and that she thought was not nothing. December came without announcement. The days grew shorter, and the air turned sharp, and Ashford Estate moved into the quiet rhythm of late autumn, the way it always did. Firewood stacked supply orders, completed tenants settled for the colder months. Eleanor had managed all of it same as every year. The difference was that this year Alexander watched her do it, not intrusively, not with the guilty hovering of a man trying to demonstrate improvement. He watched the way you watch something you should have noticed years ago and are only now beginning to understand the full shape of. He asked questions, occasionally careful ones, specific ones, nothing that demanded a particular response. She answered them. Factually. Without warmth, but without coldness either. They were not reconciled. They were not enemies. They existed in the particular suspended state of two people who had said everything necessary and were now waiting to see what the words had actually meant. Margaret called it the quiet before the answer. Eleanor called it work. Because it was. Holding yourself steady inside uncertainty was the hardest kind of work there was, and she did it every day without complaint, because that was who she was, and she was not going to stop being who she was, because the situation was difficult. Then the letter arrived from Philadelphia. It came on a Tuesday morning addressed to Eleanor personally. With a return address, she recognized the Whitmore family solicitors firm, which had handled her father's wider business interests in the North. She opened it at the breakfast table before Alexander came down. She read it twice. Then she set it face down beside her cup and finished her tea in silence. The letter was from a man named William Forsythe, a business partner of her father's from the Philadelphia merchant community. He wrote that he had long admired James Whitmore's judgment in all matters, and that he had recently become aware through mutual connections of Mrs. Ashford's work, managing the charitable educational program in the Richmond area. He wrote that he was in the process of establishing a formal educational trust in Philadelphia and was seeking someone with demonstrated organizational experience to serve in an advisory capacity. He wrote that the role would require occasional travel to Philadelphia, but could otherwise be managed independently. He wrote that he would be grateful for her consideration. He wrote that the advisory fee was $200 annually. Eleanor sat with that number for a long moment. $200, more than 4 times the annual rental income from the Whitmore house. Enough to live on independently if managed carefully alongside the property income. Enough to make every option real, not just theoretical. She heard Alexander's footsteps on the stairs. She turned the letter face down. She did not tell him about it immediately. Not out of deception, she had committed herself to honesty, and she intended to keep that commitment. But she needed to understand what she wanted to do about it before she said anything to anyone, including Margaret. She thought about it all day, through the morning correspondence, through a conversation with Thomas Hadley about the Northern Fields winter drainage, through lunch which she ate at her desk, through an hour of sewing in the sitting room that produced nothing but uneven stitches because her mind was elsewhere. By 4 o'clock, she had her answer. She was going to respond to Mr. Forsythe. She was going to express genuine interest. She was going to ask for more specific information about the role and its requirements. She was going to do that regardless of what happened with Alexander, because this she understood clearly. Sitting at her desk in the late afternoon light, this was the thing her father had been trying to give her. Not the property alone, not the income alone. A life that was hers in a way that no one else's decisions could take from her. A contribution that existed in her own name, independent of who her husband was or wasn't. She wrote the response to Forsythe that evening. It was 2 pages professional precise, asking the right questions in the right order. She sealed it and left it on the hall table for Thomas to post. She did not tell Alexander that night, but she told him the next morning. Howe was in the study when she came in. He had been spending more time there recently going through papers. She was fairly certain he had never properly examined before, occasionally appearing in the doorway of whatever room she was working in with a question about a ledger entry or a tenant agreement. It was not comfortable exactly, but it was real. "I received a letter yesterday," she said. She placed the Forsythe letter on the desk in front of him. He read it. She watched his face. Howe was quiet for a long time after he finished. "Philadelphia," he said. "Occasionally. Not permanently." He looked at the letter again, then at her. "You've already responded." "Yes." A pause. "You didn't tell me before you responded." "No," she said. "I decided first. Then I told you." She held his gaze. "That is how it is going to work from now on." Howe was quiet. She watched him absorb that the particular recalibration of a man who had spent his entire life assuming that major decisions ran through him first. "I understand," he said. "Do you?" "It's what I deserve," he said. "After what I did with the property income, with all of it. He set the letter down. "You're telling me that you have your own path now, regardless of what happens between us." "Yes," she said. "Exactly." He nodded slowly. "Good," he said, and the word came out quiet and without qualification, as if he had genuinely thought about it. "I mean that. It's good." She looked at him carefully. "That's the first time," she said, "that you've said something like that, and I've believed you." He met her eyes. He didn't look away. "I know," he said. 3 days before Christmas, the second thing happened. A carriage arrived at Ashford Estate in the late morning that Eleanor did not recognize. She was in the household office, a small room off the kitchen that she had appropriated 3 years ago for the practical management work that the study was too public for when Margaret appeared. "There's a man asking for Mr. Ashford," Margaret said. "He's from Richmond. He gave his name as Gerald Beaumont." Eleanor looked up. "Charlotte's father." "The same." "Where is Alexander?" "In the study." "All right, Eleanor said. "Show Mr. Beaumont to the front sitting room. Tell Alexander he has a visitor." She went back to her work. She told herself it was not her business. She managed the thought for approximately 4 minutes. Then she set down her pen and went to the hallway where she could hear without being visible what was being said in the sitting room. She was not proud of it. She did it anyway. Gerald Beaumont's voice was tense. He was a politician, a man accustomed to controlling rooms, and the tension in his voice was the particular kind that comes from a man who has lost control of something and is trying to get it back through force of presence. "This has gone far enough," he was saying. "My daughter's reputation is in pieces. There are people in this county who know the shape of what happened, even if they don't know all the details. I am here to ask you formally as her father what you intend to do about it." Alexander's voice was even. "Mr. Beaumont, I have ended any connection with your daughter. That was done immediately. I owe you an apology for the situation. I offer it without reservation. An apology is not what I'm asking for." "Then what are you asking for?" A short pause. "I am asking," Beaumont said carefully, "whether you intend to take any further steps to repair the damage to her standing. There are ways a man in your position could—" "No," Alexander said. A silence. "No," Beaumont repeated. "No," Alexander said again, with exactly the same steadiness. "I will not take steps to elevate your daughter's social standing as a consequence of my poor behavior. That is not a solution, it is a different problem. Charlotte was treated badly. I acknowledge that. But the answer is not to make that connection permanent in another form." A pause. "What your daughter needs, Mr. Beaumont, is time and distance, not my continued involvement in her life in any capacity." Another silence. Longer. "You are aware," Beaumont said with a slight shift in his voice, the particular shift of a man moving from request to threat, "that I have standing in this community. That certain information, if it became more widely known—" "Mr. Beaumont." Alexander cut across him, not rudely cleanly. "If you are suggesting that you would spread information about this situation in a way that would damage my family, including my wife, who has done nothing wrong in any of this, in order to improve your daughter's position, then I need you to consider very carefully whether that is the kind of man you want to be." A pause. "And I need you to understand that I will not be threatened into doing something that would ultimately harm more people than it helped." Silence. Eleanor stood very still in the hallway. "My wife," Alexander continued, "has conducted herself with more integrity in the past 2 months than I have managed in 8 years. If you damage her reputation in an attempt to leverage me, you will not find me compliant. You will find me opposing you in every professional and social context available to me. That is not a threat. It is a statement of fact." She heard Beaumont stand. His chair scraped the floor. "Good day, Mr. Ashford," he said stiffly. "Good day," Alexander said. Eleanor moved away from the hallway before Beaumont reached the door. She went back to the household office. She sat down. She picked up her pen. Her hand was not entirely steady. She put the pen down again. She sat with what she had just heard for a long moment. He had defended her. Not with sentiment, with specificity. My wife has conducted herself with more integrity in the past 2 months than I have managed in 8 years. He had said it to a man who was trying to leverage him. He had said it without knowing she could hear it. That was different from the letter with the list. The letter could have been strategy. This had no audience. This had been just the truth when there was no advantage to telling it. She picked up her pen again. Her hand was steadier. She told Margaret that evening. Margaret listened without interrupting. When Eleanor finished, she sat quietly for a moment. "He didn't know you could hear," she said. "No." "Then that was real," Margaret said. "I think so," Eleanor said. "I think it was." She paused. "I am still not certain what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything with it yet." Margaret said the same thing she always said when Eleanor needed to sit with something uncomfortable. But this time, it landed differently. Because this time, the uncomfortable thing was not more evidence of damage. It was the beginning of something else. "He's changing," Eleanor said. Slowly, in the specific ways that matter. She looked at Margaret. "I told him in part 3 that I needed to watch what he did, not what he said. He's doing things." "Yes," Margaret said. "He is." "And that makes this harder," Eleanor said, "not easier. Because it means the decision I have to make is no longer simple." Margaret looked at her steadily. "It never was simple," she said. "You just thought it might become clear. Clarity and simplicity aren't the same thing." Eleanor looked at her. "When did you get so philosophical?" "I've always been philosophical," Margaret said. "You've just been too busy to notice." 2 days before Christmas, Eleanor made a decision. She went to Alexander's study. He was there. He was always there in the evenings now, working, reading occasionally, just sitting with a book. He wasn't really reading. She had noticed that about him in the past few weeks. He was spending more time being still than she had ever seen him be. She came in and closed the door behind her. He looked up. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to understand that it is not a negotiation. It is not an invitation to respond with promises. It is simply what is true." "All right," he said. She stood in the center of the room. She had thought about how to say this for several days, and she had concluded that the only way to say it was directly. "I have spent this entire autumn deciding whether I have anything left to build this marriage from," she said. "Not whether I love you. That question is more complicated than I can answer right now, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But whether there is enough honesty between us now to make something real, something worth choosing." He was very still. "I have watched you," she said. "Every day. The way you asked about the ledgers, the way you handled Gerald Beaumont, the letter you left on my desk, the questions you've been asking Thomas Hadley about the tenants, the way you stopped defending yourself and started just looking at things clearly." She paused. "I have watched all of it." "Eleanor." "I'm not finished," she said. He closed his mouth. "I am not ready to say the marriage is repaired," she said. "It isn't. There are things between us that will take a long time to heal, and some of them may not heal completely. I need you to accept that without demanding a different answer." She met his eyes. "But I am also not going to the Whitmore house in January." He went very still in a different way. "I am staying," she said. "Not because I need to. I want you to understand that clearly I am not staying because I have no options. I have options. The Forsyth advisory role. The property. The income. I have a full independent life available to me, and I could walk into it in January without looking back." She paused. "I am staying because I am choosing to. Because I think there is something honest here now that wasn't there before. And because I would rather find out whether this marriage can become something real than spend the rest of my life wondering." I was looking at her with an expression she did not have a complete name for. Not relief was too simple. Something that carried the particular weight of a man understanding possibly for the first time what it meant that someone was choosing him. Not the title, not the estate, not the security. Him, despite everything. "I have conditions," she said. "Yes," he said immediately. "The Whitmore property stays in my name, under my management. The income is mine." "Yes. The household accounts, I manage them, formally, with full authority, not as an assumed arrangement, as an acknowledged one. Yes. The Forsyth advisory role, I will accept it if the terms are satisfactory. You will not object. I would not think of it, he said. And the way he said it was not surrender. It was something closer to respect. And Charlotte Beaumont, she said. I told you once, I am not saying it again. She is out of my life entirely, he said. That was the first decision I made, Eleanor, the night after the ball. Whatever else I failed at, I want you to know that was immediate. She looked at him for a moment. I believe you, she said. A long silence. He stood up from the desk. He came to stand a few feet in front of her, not reaching for her, not moving too close. Just standing in the same space the way people stand when they are trying to be honest without pressure. I don't know how to thank you, he said, for staying, for all of it, for the way you handled every part of this. You don't need to thank me, she said. What I need from you is not gratitude, it's consistency. Every day going forward, that's all. I know, he said. I'll give it. You had better, she said, and there was something in her voice that was almost the faint beginning of dry humor. The particular tone she used with Margaret when she was making a point, but not quite pressing it all the way. He caught it. Something shifted in his face, a cautious, careful acknowledgement that she had, in the smallest possible way, made room for something lighter. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the first crack of light under a door. I'll give it, he said again, quietly, like a promise. She nodded. She turned to go. Eleanor, he said. She stopped. Your father told me, Alexander said carefully, the day before the wedding, that you were the most capable person he had ever known. He said it to me specifically. He said, she will run whatever she puts her mind to running. I am trusting you not to waste that. He paused. I wasted it for 8 years. I am aware of that. I am going to spend whatever time you give me trying to make it right. She stood at the door for a moment. My father, she said, was usually right about most things. She walked out. Christmas Eve. Alexander did something she had not expected. She came downstairs in the morning to find the household staff assembled in the front hall, not for any formal occasion, just gathered. Thomas the driver, the maid, the cook, the 2 farmhands who worked the near fields and occasionally came in for meals. And Alexander standing among them, looking slightly uncomfortable, in the way of a man doing something unfamiliar, but committed to it. He had asked Margaret, it emerged, to gather them all. When Eleanor appeared at the bottom of the stairs, he turned to face her in front of all of them. I want to say something, he said. He said it to Eleanor, but he said it in a voice that the room could hear. This estate has been running well for 6 years because of the work of one person that most of us failed to acknowledge. I am correcting that now. He looked at her. Mrs. Ashford manages this household. She makes the decisions that keep it functioning. I want that to be understood by everyone here and by anyone who asks as the permanent arrangement. The room was quiet. Margaret, standing to one side with her arms folded, had an expression that was strictly neutral in a way that only meant she was working very hard to suppress something. Eleanor stood at the bottom of the stairs for a moment. She looked at her husband, at the slightly stiff set of his shoulders, at the way he was holding himself with the particular formality of a man outside his comfort zone, doing something he had decided to do anyway. Thank you, Alexander, she said. Clearly, in front of everyone. He nodded. He stepped to the side. She walked into the kitchen to begin the morning. Margaret followed her. Well, Margaret said when the kitchen door closed behind them. Yes, Eleanor said. He told the entire staff. He did. In the front hall. I noticed. A short silence. Is it enough? Margaret asked. Eleanor thought about it. She thought about the letter with the list. She thought about Gerald Beaumont in the sitting room. She thought about the Forsyth letter on the hall table already answered. She thought about the correspondence upstairs locked, holding every document that had changed her understanding of her own life. It's a beginning, she said. A real one. She picked up her cup. That's more than I thought I'd have 2 months ago. It's more than most people get, Margaret said. Yes, Eleanor agreed. It is. She wrote to Robert Kane that same afternoon. A short letter. 3 sentences. Please ensure the Whitmore property renewal documentation is completed in my name upon the current tenant's departure. I will not require any transfers of management authority. The property remains under my full and independent control. She signed it with her own name, Eleanor Whitmore Ashford, both names in full, the way she had stopped signing things sometime in the 2nd year of her marriage without noticing she had stopped. She sealed it. She gave it to Thomas. She went back to her desk. She opened the household ledger to a fresh page. At the top, in her clear, steady handwriting, she wrote the date, December 24th, 1817. She wrote the heading for the New Year's accounts, and below that in the same hand she had used for 6 years, organized precise, completely her own, she began. January came in cold and clear. The Whitmore tenant vacated on the 3rd, and Robert Kane sent confirmation the following morning that the property documentation had been completed exactly as Eleanor had requested, her name, full authority, no encumbrance. She read the letter at breakfast, folded it, and placed it in her correspondence box without comment. Alexander, sitting across the table, watched her do it and said nothing. He had learned in the past month when silence was the appropriate response. That was not a small thing. Eleanor had noted it. The new year had brought a different quality to the house. Not warmth exactly, they had not arrived at warmth yet, and she was not going to pretend they had. But something steadier. Something that felt less like the suspended tension of 2 people waiting for the next crisis, and more like the deliberate, careful work of 2 people trying to understand where the ground actually was beneath them. Alexander had continued his habit of asking questions. Specific ones grounded in the ledgers he had spent December going through page by page. He asked about the supply contract she had renegotiated in 1815 that had reduced the household's annual provision cost by nearly 12%. He asked about the informal arrangement she had reached with the 3 tenant families in the eastern section that had prevented 2 lease disputes from becoming formal disagreements. He asked one evening how she had learned to do any of it. She had looked at him across the study. "My father," she said, "and paying attention." He had written that down. She had seen him do it, and she had not commented on it, and later she had thought about that moment for a long time. A man who wrote things down was a man who intended to remember them. That was either genuine or the longest, most elaborate performance she had ever witnessed. She had decided after 6 weeks of watching that it was genuine. Not complete. He was not a transformed man, not a different man. Entirely because people did not become different people in 2 months, regardless of how much they wanted to. But he was a man who was looking at himself clearly, possibly for the first time, and not looking away from what he saw. That was more than she had expected. It was not everything she needed, but it was real. The letter from William Forsythe arrived in the 2nd week of January, with formal terms for the Philadelphia advisory role. Eleanor read it in the household office, made 3 notes in the margin, and wrote back the same day, accepting the position with 2 modifications to the proposed arrangement. Forsythe responded within the week, agreeing to both. She told Alexander over dinner. "It's confirmed," she said. "I'll travel to Philadelphia in March for the first organizational meeting. 3 days. I'll need Thomas and the carriage." "Of course," he said. "The March household accounts will need to be managed in my absence. I'll prepare a summary document before I leave." "I can manage it," he said. She looked at him. "Have you ever managed a household account ledger?" A beat. "No," he admitted. "But I've been reading them for 2 months. I believe I can follow the format." "You'll make errors," she said. "Probably," he agreed. "Tell me how to correct them." She studied him for a moment. Then she said, "After dinner, bring the current ledger to the study, and I'll walk you through the quarterly reconciliation process." He nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she said. "It's practical. The household doesn't stop running because I'm in Philadelphia." "No," he said. "It doesn't." They finished dinner. He brought the ledger. She walked him through it for an hour and a half. The reconciliation process, the notation system, the 3 accounts that required separate tracking. He asked good questions. He made one mistake and caught it himself before she pointed it out. When they finished, he closed the ledger and looked at her. "You built a system," he said. "This isn't just record-keeping, it's a complete management system." "Yes," she said. "How long did it take you to develop it?" "About 2 years to fully refine it," she said. "The first year was rougher." He looked at the ledger for a moment. "I want you to know something," he said. "Not as an apology, and not to ask anything in return. I want you to know that when I look at this, at everything you built here, I understand what I failed to see. And the fact that it took me 8 years and a catastrophe to open my eyes is something I will carry for the rest of my life." She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "I believe that now." He looked up at her. "When did you start believing it?" "Christmas Eve," she said. "In front of the staff." He nodded slowly. "That mattered to you." "It mattered," she said, "because you did it without being asked. That's the difference, Alexander, between what people do when they want to be forgiven and what they do when they've actually changed." He was quiet. "I'm not fully there yet," he said. "I know that." "No," she agreed, "but you're going in the right direction." She closed the ledger and handed it to him. "Keep it until I come back from Philadelphia," she said. "Manage it yourself. When I return, we'll review it together, and I'll tell you how you did." He took it. He looked at it in his hands for a moment. "That's a test," he said. "Everything is a test," she said. "The difference is that this one I'm telling you about in advance." The third week of January brought the piece of news that Eleanor had not anticipated. Margaret came in on a Wednesday morning with the particular expression she wore when she had information that required sitting down to receive. "Gerald Beaumont," she said. "I heard this from Mrs. Holloway. You know she knows everything that happens in this county before anyone else does." "What about him?" Eleanor said. "He's been spreading talk," Margaret said. "Carefully, in the way politicians spread things, not directly, nothing anyone can pin to him. But there are conversations happening in Richmond about the Ashford family, about the autumn, about—" She paused. "About you, Eleanor, specifically." Eleanor set down her pen. "What kind of talk?" "The kind that suggests you were complicit in some way. That the situation with Charlotte was more complicated than it appeared. That you were aware and permissive for your own reasons." The room was very quiet. "He's trying to protect Charlotte's reputation," Eleanor said, "by damaging mine." "Yes," Margaret said. Eleanor was still for a long moment. Then she stood up. "Where is Alexander?" "In the study." She walked out of the household office and down the hall and into the study without knocking. Alexander looked up from the ledger he had been working on it every morning, she had noticed without being asked. "Gerald Beaumont is spreading damaging talk about me in Richmond," she said. "About my character, suggesting I was complicit in what happened in some way. I need you to know, and I need to know what you're going to do about it." He was already standing. "Who told you?" he said. "Margaret, from Mrs. Holloway." He came around the desk. He was not the slow, careful man he had been in December. He was the man she had married, the one who commanded rooms, the one who made decisions at speed when he needed to. "I'm going to Richmond today," he said. "Don't make it worse," she said immediately. "A public confrontation. I'm not going to confront him publicly," he said. "I'm going to have a private conversation with 3 men whose opinions Gerald Beaumont values, and whose judgment carries weight in every room he operates in. I'm going to tell them the accurate version of events. I'm going to make it clear that Eleanor Whitmore Ashford conducted herself with complete integrity throughout a situation that was entirely of my making, and I'm going to make it known without theatrics that I will not tolerate her name being used as currency in a social transaction." She looked at him. "That's not a confrontation," she said. "No," he said. "It's a correction. There's a difference." She had said those words to him. Twice. In different contexts. He had remembered both times. "Go," she said. He picked up his coat. He stopped at the door. "Eleanor, I am sorry that this is happening. It is a consequence of my choices, and you are the one absorbing it. I know that. I know you know, she said. Go fix it. He left. She stood in the study for a moment. Then she went back to the household office and picked up her pen and went back to work. Because that was what she did. She worked and she waited, and she did not let fear of what other people were saying pull her off the course she had set. He came back from Richmond at 7 in the evening. She was in the sitting room. She heard the front door. She heard him give his coat to the maid. She heard his steps in the hall, purposeful, not heavy. He came in and sat down across from her. It's handled, he said. All of it. I spoke with James Whitfield Thomas Reeves and Cornelius Harper. She knew all three names, men of significant standing in Richmond's commercial and social community, men whose word carried the particular authority of people who had held their positions for a long time and were not easily moved. I told them the accurate account. I told them my conduct was entirely responsible for the situation. I told them that any suggestion of Eleanor's complicity was categorically false. I told them I expected that to be the version of events that circulated going forward. And Beaumont. Whitfield will speak with him privately, Alexander said. Beaumont won't push further. He knows what it would cost him to be seen publicly as the man who attacked an innocent woman to cover for his daughter's involvement in someone else's marriage. She was quiet for a moment. Did you tell them everything? She asked. About Charlotte, about your role, all of it. Yes, he said. I told them everything. That was not easy, she said. No, he said. It wasn't. He met her eyes. But it was true. And I've been in the habit lately of telling the truth even when it costs something. She looked at him for a long moment. You told them everything, she said again, in order to protect me. I told them the truth, he said. Your protection is a consequence of the truth, not a strategy around it. She was quiet. You understand the difference, she said. You've been teaching me, he said, whether you intended to or not. February moved through the house quickly, the way months do when people are busy with real things. Eleanor prepared her materials for the Philadelphia meeting. Alexander managed the household ledger with only 2 errors, both minor, both self-corrected, before she reviewed it. The Whitmore property in Richmond was formally cleared and documented. A letter from Catherine in Charleston arrived warm relieved with 3 paragraphs about the particular satisfaction of watching a woman she admired make decisions from a position of genuine strength rather than necessity. Eleanor read that letter 3 times. The charitable organization met in February with a proposal. Eleanor had been developing since November a formal expansion of the educational program into 2 additional districts with a funding structure she had designed herself and a governance model that ensured the program could survive without her direct involvement if needed. The committee approved it unanimously. Dorothea Hale had looked at Eleanor across the table with an expression that needed no translation. Dorothea found her afterward in the hall. You built something that doesn't need you to survive, Dorothea said. That's harder than building something that does. It's more useful, Eleanor said. Yes, Dorothea said. It is. A pause. How are things at home? Eleanor considered the question. Better, she said. Slowly, but genuinely better. And you? How are you? Eleanor thought about it for a real moment. Not the automatic. I'm fine, that she had been giving people for years, the one that cost nothing and conveyed nothing but the actual answer. I am more myself than I have been in 8 years, she said. That is a strange thing to say about a period that included the worst months of my marriage, but it's true. Dorothea nodded slowly. When you know who you are, regardless of what someone else does, she said, it changes everything. Yes, Eleanor said. It does. The night before she left for Philadelphia, Alexander came to find her in the household office. She was finishing the summary document she had promised him, a 12-page guide to the household management processes, written clearly enough that anyone who had been reading the ledgers for 2 months could follow it. She had been more thorough than strictly necessary. She had noticed that about herself and decided not to reduce it. He had asked good questions. He deserved good answers. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "You're still working," he said. "Nearly finished." He came in. He sat in the chair across from her desk, the chair she thought of as the visitor's chair, though he had never been a visitor in this room before the autumn. He leaned back in it with a looseness she had not often seen from him, less performed, more present. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to know that I'm not asking because I expect a particular answer. I'm asking because it's the honest question." She set down her pen. "Ask it." "Are you happy?" he said. Not with me specifically. In your life, right now. Is this the life you want?" She looked at him for a moment. It was, she thought, possibly the most important question he had ever asked her. And the fact that he had asked it openly without steering toward a particular answer, without the slight undertone of expectation that had characterized so many of his questions across 8 years, was itself part of the answer to a different question she had been carrying. "Yes," she said. "Not completely. There are things still broken that I don't know if they'll fully mend. There are things I lost that I won't get back, years of working in silence, that should have been acknowledged trust, that was spent in ways that left marks." She held his gaze. "But I have work that is mine, a property that is mine, a position in this community that exists in my own name, a marriage that is finally, after 8 years, honest." She paused. "So yes, on the whole, yes." Howe was quiet for a long time. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Going forward. Not what I've promised. What you actually need." She thought about it. "Keep asking questions," she said. "About the ledgers, about the tenants, about the work. Don't stop looking at it just because you've started. That's the thing that matters most, not the grand gestures, the daily attention." "I can do that," he said. "You've been doing it," she said. "For 2 months. I've noticed." He nodded. "And Eleanor," he said, "for what it is worth, after everything I see you, I know that I should have said that 8 years ago, and every year between then and now. I know that saying it now cost very little compared to what the silence cost you." He paused. "But I see you, all of it, and I am in awe of it." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "I believe that too." She picked up her pen. She went back to the summary document. He stayed in the chair. He did not leave immediately. He sat in the quiet room while she finished writing, not interrupting, not asking for anything. Just there. After a while she realized that she did not mind, that she thought was something she had not expected to find on the other side of the worst autumn of her life. Not forgiveness. Forgiveness was still complicated and would remain so. Not the return of what she had lost. Some of that was gone, and she was honest enough to accept it. But the small particular comfort of not being alone in the room. She finished the document. She numbered the pages. She set it on the corner of the desk where he would find it in the morning. She stood up. "I'm going to bed," she said. "Philadelphia is an early start." "I know," he said. He stood. She walked to the door. "Alexander," she said without turning around. "Yes." "When I come back from Philadelphia," she said, "I'd like to have dinner in the dining room, the formal one, with the good dishes." A pause. "It's been a long time since I felt like being formal about anything. I think I'm ready to feel like that again." She heard him breathe. "I'll tell the cook," he said. She walked out. She left for Philadelphia the next morning at 6:30. Margaret walked her to the carriage. Thomas had the horses ready. The morning was cold, and the sky was the particular pale gray of early winter that would be clear by noon. Margaret handed her the traveling bag. 3 days, Eleanor said. "I know," Margaret said. "The household will be fine." "I know that too," Margaret said. "He's been studying that ledger like it's scripture." Eleanor almost smiled. "He'll make errors." "Everyone makes errors," Margaret said. "The question is whether they correct them." "He corrects them," Eleanor said. "I've noticed." Margaret looked at her with the expression that said she was filing this away, alongside everything else she had observed across 40 years of watching Eleanor grow from a 7-year-old girl into the woman standing in front of her now. "You look different," Margaret said, "than you did in October." "I am different," Eleanor said. "Better different or harder different?" Eleanor thought about it. "Clearer," she said. "I know exactly who I am now, and exactly what I will and won't accept, and exactly what I'm building." She looked at Margaret directly. "That's not harder, that's just honest." Margaret nodded once, the particular nod that meant she agreed completely and did not need to say anything further. Eleanor got into the carriage. Thomas clicked to the horses. The carriage moved down the drive. She did not look back at the house as they went. Not out of coldness, she knew every stone of it, every field surrounding it, every name of every person who worked it. She had carried all of it in her hands for 6 years. She would carry it for years more. But she was also going forward now, into something new. Something she had built herself from a position of genuine strength with her own name on the paperwork. She thought about her father. She thought about the letter from Harold Sloane, still in the correspondence box. She thought about the way James Whitmore had loved her imperfectly with secrets, with arrangements he should have told her about, with the particular overprotection of a man who underestimated his daughter's ability to handle the truth. She forgave him. Fully somewhere in the gray morning between Ashford and the Richmond Road. Not because what he had done was right, but because she understood it, and because the man had loved her in the best way he knew how, and because she was done carrying the weight of other people's imperfect love, as if it were a verdict on her own worth. She was not the woman Alexander had almost let go of. She was not the daughter James Whitmore had tried to protect. She was Eleanor Whitmore Ashford, both names in full, the way she signed her letters now, and she was on her way to Philadelphia on her own business, in a carriage that would be waiting to bring her home in 3 days, to a husband who was reading a household ledger, and a housekeeper who would have strong opinions about whatever mistakes he made. She pulled her coat closer and watched Virginia move past the window. 3 days later, she came home. The carriage came up the drive in the late afternoon. The household was lit, the kitchen warm smoke from multiple chimneys. Thomas opened the carriage door and she stepped down. Alexander came out of the front door before she had reached the steps. He did not rush. He came down at a measured pace, the way a man comes towards something he is not sure he deserves, but is not going to pretend he doesn't want. He stopped a few feet from her. "How was Philadelphia?" he said. "Excellent," she said. "Forsyth is serious and organized, and the trust has real potential. I have considerable work to do before the next meeting." "Good," he said. A pause. "The ledger," he said. "I made an error in the 3rd week's supply reconciliation. I caught it on Saturday and corrected it. I left a note on the page explaining the correction and how I found it." She looked at him. "Show me," she said. He turned and walked back into the house. She followed him. They went to the household office. He opened the ledger to the page in question and showed her the error, the correction, and the note he had written in the margin, precise, clear, in his particular careful handwriting. She read it. She read the surrounding entries. She looked at the full 3 weeks of work. She set the ledger down. "You didn't make any other errors," she said. "Not that I found," he said. "I checked 3 times." "You checked 3 times," she repeated. "I didn't want to hand it back to you with uncorrected mistakes," he said simply. She looked at him for a moment. Then she took the ledger, turned to the current page, and wrote the date and the notation for her return. She set the pen down and held the ledger out to him. "You keep it," she said. "Going forward. I'll review with you weekly, but the daily management is yours as much as mine now." I took it. He held it the way a person holds something they were not expecting, to be given with care and a slight pause, as if making sure they had the grip right. "Are you certain?" he said. "I have a trust to advise in Philadelphia and an educational program expanding into 2 new districts," she said. "I need someone managing this alongside me, not watching me manage it alone." She met his eyes. "Yes, I'm certain." He nodded. He did not make a speech about it. He just nodded and held the ledger and looked at her with the expression she had started to recognize in the past 2 months, the one that was not performing gratitude, but simply registering it quietly in the way that things register when they are real. She picked up her traveling bag. I'm going to change, and then I'd like that dinner, she said. The formal dining room. Tell the cook I'm home. She already knows, he said. She started an hour ago when Thomas sent word from the road. Eleanor stopped. She started before I arrived, she said. I told her, he said last week, that when you came home, the first dinner should be a proper one. That was the plan. She looked at him. He had planned it, before she arrived. Not as a response to her mood or a reaction to what she asked. He had decided on his own that her return mattered enough to prepare for. She thought, that is the difference. That is the specific thing that cannot be performed over the long term. Thank you, she said. She went upstairs. She changed out of her traveling dress. She opened the correspondence box and placed the Forsyth meeting notes inside, beside the letter from Harold Sloane, and the copies from Kane, and the list Alexander had written in December. She locked the box. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. Not with vanity, she had never been vain, but with the particular directness of a woman checking in with herself. Asking, who are you right now? Are you the person you want to be? The answer was yes. Not perfectly, not without damage, not without the knowledge of what the past autumn had cost and what had been permanently changed by it. But yes, clearly, honestly, in her own name, yes. She put the key in her pocket. She went downstairs. I was waiting at the entrance to the dining room. Not fussing, not performing, just standing there with the ledger still tucked under one arm because he had forgotten to put it down. That small, unguarded detail, the household ledger under his arm like it belonged there, steadied something in her that she hadn't known was still uncertain. She walked toward him. She held out her hand. He looked at it for a moment. Then he took it carefully without assuming the way you take something that is offered, rather than something you have a right to. They walked into the dining room together. The good dishes were set. The candles were lit. And Eleanor Whitmore Ashford, who had walked out of a ballroom 2 months ago with 2 words and the full weight of her own dignity, walked into her dining room and sat down at her own table, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had chosen to. That she thought was everything. That was the whole of it. She unfolded her napkin. She looked across the table at her husband, who was setting the ledger down beside his chair, quietly, without comment, as if it were perfectly ordinary to bring the household accounts to a formal dinner, because he had simply forgotten to put it down, and was not going to pretend otherwise. She felt for the first time in longer than she could name the particular lightness of being exactly where she had decided to be. She picked up her fork. Tell me about the Northfield, she said. He looked up. The drainage held through January, he said. Thomas Hadley said it's the best winter he's seen from that section in 5 years. Good, she said. I made a note, he said, to check it again in March. She looked at him. That's exactly right, she said. And they had dinner.